You know, Jerusalem's in the center of the world. And we really believe, Yechiel and our whole team at JCPA, that Jerusalem is our shared city for all of us here. For Jews, Muslims, and Christians, it is our holy shared city. And if you look at the print here, we never discussed why we have this wood carving. This is the logo of the center. Abdullah Abu Junaid, he said about, we have to restabilize. Where are you, Abdullah? You said something very, very important, many things important, but at the end, we have to restabilize the region. Here is the vision 500 years ago for the three continents as Heinrich Bunting was a German theologian, and he made a wood carving, which became, for 50 years, as our logo. And in the carving, you see the three great continents, Asia, Africa, Europe, and in the middle, Jerusalem. That was a geographic vision, and it was a theological vision from his point of view. And is it not extraordinary that in 2023, we all sit together, leaders and colleagues of these three great continents, sitting together where? Actually in Jerusalem, to concretize the vision that was 500 years old. So sometimes dreams really do come true. And I want to, in that sense, say that when Yechiel and I were discussing having this conference with our team at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, we thought about the concept of national security in a much broader context than what we're going to speak about in a moment. Usually when we've spoken about national security, we have our discussions with General Kuperwasser about counterinsurgency, counterterrorism, and the classic sense of security. But it was very important for us to understand that food security, water security, agriculture, infrastructure, becoming net exporters also becomes part of national security of each country that we represent here today. But at the end of the day, what Abdullah al-Junaid said, we have to restabilize. To restabilize, to build a more resilient societies across the Middle East, Israel, Middle East, and Africa, we have to securitize. We really have to securitize in the classic sense our societies. We have to make sure that we have physical security. And it's no surprise to anyone here that we all deal with very serious security challenges in the most classic sense of the word. Military security, national security, physical security. Israel had in that context, Israel had a very troubling event that took place very recently over our northern border, which shook up our security echelons quite a lot. There was in the end, Hezbollah has a Unit 131 that works together with Hamas from southern Lebanon at the instruction of the IRGC in Tehran that sent a particular individual who ended up, we learned 2 days ago, on a collapsible ladder that climbed up, somehow figured out a way to climb over the fence and took a scooter and laid down an IED, the kinds that were laid down by IRGC in Iraq against American forces, on a main highway with the intention of killing tens of people on a main thoroughfare. And it was only by luck or blessing that it didn't happen. But it created a real understanding that this was a strategic game changer from the point of view of our security. And we had, I don't know if you know, since the beginning of 2023, and our formal statistics are show, we had 50 terror attacks in Israel since January 2023. And last year, according to also the Global Terrorism Report, Israel suffered more than 5,000 terror attacks. Drones, rockets, missiles, drive-bys, shootings, and a lot of stone throwing. And so, but Israel's not unique. Although we're tracing a lot of the terrorism that goes on in our cities actually back to the IRGC and the Hamas-Hezbollah intersection, I think in the region we're dealing with a lot of the same issues. Georgia, you wrote a lot about Hezbollah in Nigeria, in fact, northern Nigeria to be specific. Ahdeya, you talk a lot about we talk a lot about Bahrain and Hezbollah. So I'm going to introduce now our esteemed panelists and talk about the security challenges that each one faces, and perhaps what can be done in order to generate greater security for our region and our countries. So, Ahdeya, it's a great, Ahdeya Ahmed al-Said in Bahrain, the former president of the Bahraini Journalists Association. She worked as a media advisor to the Ministry of Cabinet Affairs, the Ministry of Information, and a political TV host for Bahraini television. Very, very well known in the region, very outspoken in the region, courageous in your work, in your moral clarity, and you write for a number of newspapers. Amin, it's really what a pleasure it is to have you from Iran and the United States as well, which gives you a bicontinental perspective. Amin was born in Shiraz, which is a great wine country, in Iran, and his political activity and education aimed at the actualization of democracy in Iran and laying the groundwork for realistic foreign policy for a democratic and free Iran. He's a frequent contributor to media outlets such as BBC and other international outlets. Amin is a member of a think tank called Anjuman Shahriar, and a writer for a number of magazines in Farsi. You hold 2 graduate degrees from the University of Oklahoma in the United States, International Studies Philosophy, and his PhD is being completed in Indiana University with majors in philosophy and Middle Eastern studies, and his research interests on conflict in the Middle East, modern Iran, ancient and medieval philosophy, Al-Farabi, and of course what we call the Rambam or Maimonides. Ebne Maimun, which is quite fascinating. Next name is a longtime teacher of mine, actually, Brigadier General Yossi Kuperwasser, a senior not only senior commentator and expert, but fellow at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Brigadier General Kuperwasser was formerly the Director General of the Ministry of Strategic Affairs and the former Director of the Intelligence Assessment Directorate at Israeli Military Intelligence. Has been involved on the Iranian, on following and recommending on the Iranian file for 30 years, more than 30 years. A little bit more than 30 years, 35, we'll give you a little extra. And Professor Antonia, it's really an honor to have you. Antonia Taiye Simbine from Nigeria, Director General of the Nigerian Institute of Social and Economic Reform. Professor Antonia is the immediate past National Electoral Commissioner of Nigeria's Independent National Electoral Commission, and she holds a certificate in international civilian peacekeeping and peace building from the Austrian Center for Peace and Conflict Resolution. And Professor Antonia, your areas of interest include peace and conflict, government politics, elections, and women's political participation in Nigeria. And next to Professor Antonia is a longtime friend and colleague. We switched places. That's okay. Dawit Giorgis, also a friend and colleague, but not from the Knesset. Dawit is a commentator, writer, scholar, and executive director of the Namibia-based Africa Institute for Strategic and Security Studies. And Dawit served as the PS of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, governor of Eritrea prior to its independence, and Relief and Rehabilitation Commissioner during the famine relief operations. And then you served as a UN consultant in the 11 African conflict and post-conflict countries, and was a visiting fellow at Princeton University and the University of Cape Town in South Africa, and Foundation for the Defense, FDD, in DC. So you have a very broad perspective. And Dawit has written a lot on the challenge of Hezbollah in Africa, and we'll ask you a lot about that. And next to Dawit is a dear colleague and friend, former member of Knesset, Anat Berko, Dr. Anat Berko, who is one of the leading experts since her esteemed PhD on the issue of the psychology of terrorism, the psychology of suicide bombing. What's the mindset? How do we understand what turns children, and in your particular area of research, women and children, to become suicide bombers? And she's advised the highest levels of many Israeli governments, not just one, and was an esteemed member of Knesset 2 Knessets ago, and had the great privilege of being a guest in her committee. And we'll be delighted to hear from you, Dr. Anat Berko. And finally, last but absolutely not least, to round out the picture, Dr. Burak Özpek from Turkey. Professor Burak is the Professor of Political Science and International Relations at TOBB University of Economics and Technology, and your main interest include de facto states, civil conflict, contemporary politics of the Middle East, and Turkish foreign policy. So we really have a panoply of experience, of vision, of perspective on this issue of the need to create physical security across our extended region. Ahdeya, I'm going to start with you. What I spoke about Hezbollah for Israel, it's not just for Israel. I mean, Hezbollah has very long arms across the Middle East region. Bahrain was really a pathbreaker. In 2013, it was the first Arab country actually to declare Hezbollah a terror organization, and since then the GCC in 2016. Give us your sense from where you sit about Hezbollah, perhaps the Iranian regime, and your great security challenges in your very little state, in your small state of Bahrain.
Thank you very much, Dan. Get it to work. Yeah?
Yeah, that's right.
Can you hear me? Okay, to start with, hello everyone, shalom, salam. And yes, Hezbollah, anyway, I just want to comment on something, if you may allow me, Dan. The session is called the Trusted Partnerships. I think, exactly. And I think the biggest elephant in the room is Iran. Now, as we speak about diplomatic ties being established between Iran and some of the countries in the Gulf. And why is it the biggest elephant in the room? Because this country, since the doomed Islamic called revolution in 1979, has been the worst neighbor the Arab countries could ever have. Everything Iran has done since 1979 until this day isn't something that the people of our countries can forget overnight. Now, 169 people in Bahrain were arrested in the year 2018 under a so-called Hezbollah Bahrain, in cooperation with Hezbollah Lebanon and Hezbollah Iraq. So that was something that we needed to recover from. 2017, 54 people were arrested and they were associated to Hezbollah and involved in acts of terrorism in Bahrain. When the normalization between Bahrain and Israel took place, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard threatened Bahrain by saying that we will get our revenge in the most cruel manner against Bahrain for normalizing its ties with Israel. That was 12th of September 2020. Again, I'm sharing dates with our audience here because this is not something we're going back to 40 years ago. I'm going back to 4 to 5 years ago. In November 22nd, 2021, a terrorist cell of 15 people were arrested associated to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and were trained there. Nasrallah has described our leaders as tyrants, and that was most recently on the 9th of August 2022. He has been speaking, he has been referring to our leaders as Basha'a and Qubh, ugliness of our leaders, in 29th April 2022. And Rouhani, the Iranian president himself, has been describing the UAE and Bahrain after the normalization agreements with Israel as shameful behavior. Now, Iran is taking its final breaths, and by Iran I mean the Iranian Ayatollah regime, is taking its final breaths after everything it has been doing in the region, funding Hezbollah, funding the Houthis. Do you think that we can overnight forget that Aramco and UAE were targeted by Houthis that are funded by the Iranian Revolutionary Guard? We cannot forget that overnight. But at the same time, now there is some conflict of intellectual analysis. Now, you live in countries where you have always trusted your leaders that they have the bigger picture of what's going on. These are countries that have grown over the years. For the past 40 years, Bahrain has grown, UAE has grown, so they have been in good hands. Saudi has grown. The past few years, the changes in Saudis, human rights, women's rights, they are huge growth that's happening. With Hezbollah in the Iranian regime, and if we speak about the two-state solution, I sincerely believe that as long as the Ayatollah regime exists, there is not going to be any two-state solution, because this regime is going to continue to fund Hezbollah and the Houthis, and it's just a matter of time. They need a break just because of the internal issues they have. So now they need some alliances to cover up for what they are doing, but they will remain to be the regime that rapes people, rapes women in prisons, that throws them into prisons just because they remove their hijabs, whether it's compulsory or not. This is between people and their creator. So when it comes to trusting partnerships, Iran is an entity, the regime is an entity that cannot be trusted with all these interferences going on, with all this funding of Hezbollah and Hamas. You cannot trust it. Iran is a regime that has been capable of bringing Sunni extremists and Shia extremists together on a table to discuss how to tag team against our securities. So how can that regime ever be trusted? I have trust issues with Iran, and no matter what happens, this trust issue will continue. I do not believe that they have good intentions. I do believe our leaders have great intentions, but Iran will fail because this greed that it has had towards the region to dominate the region is not a dream that will end. This was Khomeini's dream since 1979. It continues to be, and it has been repeated by all the Ayatollahs and all these so-called supreme leaders of a so-called Islamic nation.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
This might be a 1-2 punch. Amin, I'm wondering how you see it, both as an Iranian and having residency in America and learning in America. Your view, you know, when people talk, when Ahdeya talks about Iran, there's the regime, there's the IRGC, there's the Ayatollahs, the IRGC, and then there's Iranian people.
Right.
And what we understand, certainly in Israel and in the West, is that some 75% of the Iranian people are very much, are not with the regime, but with the West. How do you see, first of all, the differentiation when we talk about Iran, the Iranian public, the Iranian people, civil society, people who are in the streets today in all of the Iranian cities following Amina, the murder of Amina Masa, and the hijab, in the hijab protest, so-called, and the export of the IRGC ideology, as well as weapons, ammunition, training, ideology, etc., around the region.
Right. Hello, everyone. I would thank you, actually, JCPA, for inviting me, and thank you, Dr. Liddell, for having me here. This is my first time visiting Israel. As an Iranian American, it's a great experience. I cannot wait to go visit the city and interact with average people here. I believe in that distinction between Iranian regime and Iran as a country. Some people argue that since I was a student actually studying Middle East in the US, some of my professors would convince me that Islamic Republic's foreign policy reflects Iranian culture, history, and its geopolitical imperatives. So even if Islamic Republic falls, the new government, even democratic Iran, will continue same foreign policy. Well, I disagree with my professor. As time goes, I believe that this actually bringing Iran and Iranian regime together and saying that Iranian's regime foreign policy reflects its cultural and historical experiences, I think it's false and it's misleading. Islamic Republic has its foreign policy has three pillars. One, anti-Americanism. Second, anti-Israel. And third is supporting Islamic extremism. I mean, nothing in Iranian culture actually support these three. What it started, it starts from 1979 revolution. Before that, Iran had a great relationship with the United States, had a great relationship with Israel. I mean, Iran was I think after Turkey was first country in the Middle East that recognized Israel as a sovereign state. Iran had an extensive agricultural relationship with Israel, intelligence, technology, and everything. So if it was basically embedded in Iranian culture to be anti-Israeli, it would not happen before revolution, and ordinary people didn't have problem with that. So, but the ideological thinking, but the Islamists that came to power, they changed everything. They changed everything. I mean, now, after 40 years of having Islamic State in Iran, you can see that Iran has become the most secular society in Middle East. Many people here talk about people-to-people relationship. I agree with that. I mean, people's relationship and countries' relationship are not limited to governmental levels. It includes people-to-people relationship. But what cements actually people's relationship or turn people-to-people interaction into more cooperative relationships is shared values. So I believe that Iranian society, not Iranian regime, actually much more similar than Israeli society, than American society, than any other society in Middle East, even Turkey. So that experience basically has shaped by very painful experiences that Iranian had of Islamic regime. If we didn't have an Islamic regime, maybe people would go different direction. Still, they think that Islam can be a solution to all social and political problems. But Islamic Republic showed Iranian people in a very hard way that no, if religion will rule a country, it will turn it into hell. And Iranians, you see, in last 4 years, Iranian had 3 major nationwide uprising to come to the street and chant things that exactly what people want in the West. Women's right, tolerations, democracy, free election. So this is remarkable in Middle East. What I don't understand, actually that's my criticism of Biden administration, could not take advantage of the situation. Is still they have some sort of JCPOA hangover. They think that still they can change Iranians' behavior by appeasing it. It hasn't happened. It hasn't happened. If Iran's regime changes nature, or if it changes its behavior, it becomes different regime, and it cannot become a different regime. So that's a mistake that I think the Biden administration is doing. Talking about having a more stabilized Middle East, I mean, think about a day that Hezbollah is not funded by Islamic Republic. Think about a democratic Iran that can help Hezbollah to become part of Lebanese political process, to be part of the solution, not the problem. This will not happen as long as this regime is ruling over Iran. It's not going to happen. So if you want to have more stabilized relationship, if you want to solve Iran's nuclear threat, you cannot solve it as long as this regime is ruling over Iran. Okay, so from security point of view, any regime who wants rule over Iran, if they have anti-Americanism and anti-Israel foreign policy, they had to seek nuclear weapon. Because when you actually deprive yourself from America and Israel, you deprive yourself from modern technology to modernize your army, to beef up your security. I mean, Iran has not been able to modernize its air power since 1979. We know the significance of air power since 1967 Arab-Israeli war. That made miracle. The late Shah, after that, realized that if you want to have a very robust security system, you need to have a robust air power. Iran has not been able to modernize its air power. So what are options? Supporting extremism, having proxy groups, having nuclear weapon, or trying to have a nuclear weapon. So what I'm arguing is that this regime cannot act differently because of the limitations that its ideology defines for itself.
That's perfect. That's perfect. That's perfect. That's a perfect transition from there. General Kuperwasser, so Amin says the combination of IRGC proxy groups plus its intention to nuclearize nuclear weapons is this sort of double-headed threat. You, at Israeli military intelligence, for many decades, have tried to create, I think for the West and others, the notion that the Iranian regime threat to Israel is not only the nuclearization threat, but it's we've called it the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs, a number of publications, the Iranian regime octopus. As a matter of fact, His Majesty King Abdullah II called it, he didn't mean to insult Shia, but he said the Shia crescent in 2004. He meant the Iranian regime crescent from Iraq to Syria to Lebanon and down to Gaza, in fact. Can you create perspective for us on this dual threat?
Well, first of all, I want to really share my appreciation for this meeting. It's for this conference. It's amazing to see all these people sitting together. As we say, chapeau for Dan and Yechiel for bringing all of you together. It's amazing. And one of the things that brings us all together is this concern about Iran, or concern about radicalism. Why we are concerned? Because radicalism is first and foremost an ideology. And we are worried about this ideology. We don't support this ideology. We actually have opposing ideology. And we are worried about the tools, the structures that this ideology uses in order to promote itself. And we have a good reason to be worried, an extremely good reason to be worried, because as we speak now and we sit here all together, the radicals, and they are not only Iran and its proxies that I'm going to speak about in a minute, but also there are also some radicals on the Sunni side, that, especially within the Palestinian community, but not only, that are also raising their head. But what's happening right now is that we are getting very close to what Amin was saying about something that the Iranian regime wants to achieve. And as they become so close to having the capability to produce a nuclear weapon within a very short period of time. And not much is being done about it. We have to be really worried about it, because the entire picture is going to change once Iran has nuclear weapons. And we see that, in my mind, the way the Saudis responded to the Chinese initiative to have a rapprochement with Iran was based on their assessment that nobody is going to stop Iran from having a nuclear weapon. So we'd rather be friends with Iran instead of confronting Iran, because we don't have anybody to support us, especially not the United States. And they are even not sure about Israel, unfortunately, because what happened here with the agreement about the gas with Lebanon raised some questions about Israel's commitment to do what needs to be done in order to protect its interests. So that's where we stand right now. The structures that Iran has built, especially Hezbollah, but all the other groups that are cooperating with it, in the Houthis and the Palestinian Islamic Jihad and so on and so forth, are feeling that the forces that are there to stop them suffer from weakness. It has to do with what's happening in Israel these days. It has to do with the approach of the Biden administration towards them. That's what makes them feel that they can reshape the rules of the game in the Middle East, first and foremost, and elsewhere as well. We see it both in the fact that the Iranians are getting so close to producing 90% enriched uranium. That was supposed to be something that was a red line. Panetta, as Secretary of Defense at the time, Leon Panetta, said that the United States is not going to tolerate Iran developing nuclear weapons. Now, the chief of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Miley, says that the United States is not going to tolerate Iran fielding a nuclear weapon. Well, that's a big difference, a huge difference. And that's something that we have to be worried about. And so Iran is getting closer to this. And Hezbollah is, according to the picture you just portrayed and what happened 3 weeks ago in the north, is trying to reshape the rules of the game between us and Lebanon, saying we can carry out attacks inside Israel, but if you carry out any operation inside Lebanon, we are going to retaliate very forcefully. That's what Hezbollah is saying, and with the support of Iran, obviously. And I'm not sure if it is 131 or it is the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. It doesn't matter. It's some group that has good relations with Hezbollah and Iran that carried out this operation, maybe Hezbollah itself. So it's, that is the feeling that we are facing. Now, in order to stop that, and we need to stop that, we wouldn't like Iran to have nuclear weapons, and we cannot afford it, and we cannot afford Iran having this room of maneuver around the area, the Middle East, and definitely not in Africa, where they're trying to be more active, as well as the other radical groups, the Shabab and all the rest. In order to be able to stop them, we have to sit together like we're sitting here and cooperate much more and show more determinants to stop it. We are not determined enough. No, we don't seem to be determined enough to do that. We have to be more determined to stop this radicalism. Now, radicalism doesn't show any shyness about the tools they use. We are very, always we think to ourselves, oh, we are not going to do this, we are not going to do that. We're not going to carry out, of course, any military activities, God forbid. We have to be looking for diplomatic ways to handle every problem. The radicals don't have this way of thinking. For them, carrying out terror attacks is just fine. It's killing people, as you said, they were trying to use this explosive device in order to kill many people. Unfortunately for them, when I was the head of the military intelligence research division, I always said 80% of my job is being done by God. Because somehow 80% of the attempts to carry out terror attacks fail without our intervention. So this was another case of this being done. But we still have 20% to deal with. And they are very effective. They are carrying out attacks. Look at the number of terror attacks around Africa in recent years. It's enormous. And very vicious ones. We have to remember what's being done to Christian villages and other targets around Africa. Radicalism is not shy about using these horrible ways, just like what Amin said about what's happening inside Iran. Same thing. They are not shy about doing that. And we have to be aware that in order to fight against it, we have to be determined. We have to cooperate much more on operational and intelligence fields to share together the information we have, to be more aware, as was said in the first panel, of the needs of the others in order to be there to help them be more effective and more efficient as well in what they're doing. Yes, we have to focus on economic cooperation, we have to focus on food security, all these matters are extremely important, but life is on the agenda, on the line. So we have to be able to, first of all, deal with the number one issue, which is life. And that's what I think has to be done. We have just one last issue in this respect. One of the tools in which this ideology reaches and gains more support is through social media. And we have to be more effective on cyber issues in general, but on social media in particular. And the American Supreme Court is sitting now on the case of Gonzalez versus Google, in which Gonzalez family claims that Google had a role in radicalizing the people that killed Naomi Gonzalez in France in 2017. if we do not do anything about the role of social media, the situation is going to be even worse. We see it all over the place. It's something that we have to take action in this respect.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cooper. It's a very important remarks. Yeah. Professor Antonia, it's not by chance that you're sitting here representing Nigeria. Nigeria, the most populous country in Africa, 240 million people, and stakes are very high. As you mentioned before, Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, Sunni, Al-Qaeda and ISIS affiliates as well. And as Dawit has written over the last 10 years, you wrote in 2013, Dawit, I read an analysis about Hezbollah in northern Nigeria. So there's no shortage of insurgency groups and terror groups in Nigeria. Can you help create perspective when Cooper talked about the determination? What is the sense of urgency in Nigeria about these types of groups and their ability to completely uproot the fabric of Nigerian society?
Thank you very much. I'll join others in thanking the JCPA for this opportunity to be here, and particularly to be in the midst of the representatives that are here to listen and to learn a lot, but especially to see how partnerships can really help all of us make progress forward in terms of the problems of our various societies. They look different, they look difficult to each society, but at the end of the day, they're really interrelated. Talking about the situation in Nigeria, it's really precarious. It's been there for more than a decade. It's had a very grievous impact on the society, particularly the security of the nation, which when you look at security, it begins to affect, you look at military security, the sovereignty of the country, it's beginning to affect other aspects of society. So you see the refugee situation increasing, IDP situation, poverty of very high dimensions increasing, agricultural output, manufacturing index reducing, and so on and so forth. In all these areas, one of the ways to counter radicalism, terrorism, and counter-insurgency is really by dealing with the day-to-day lives of people. But as long as this situation continues, even the government is hamstrung in terms of dealing with these day-to-day situations. No matter how much effort is put in place, you see that it's like a cycle. You are going back to where you started from and the like. So the situation is really worrisome. But it provides opportunity for partnerships within, but much more importantly, without of Nigeria. So we look at the context that we're in today. We have a large population of both Christians, Muslims, and other religions. And even the large population of Christians do not, they hold on to Jerusalem as a place of, a place to come to for rest, a place for succor. I think that the general can be talking about being more aggressive, but I also think that the diplomatic needs to come much more with regards to Nigeria. we brokered relationships about 30 years ago. But I think there's much more that Israel can do with Nigeria. And there's much more to be exploited. There's much more with the impact of the Shiites, for instance, in Nigeria, trying to form counter administrations in the northern part of the country, questioning sitting governments. You see that even among core Muslims, they are not widely accepted. So I think that knowing that there's room for partnerships, there's room for Israel to come in to make support, to make the relationship stronger, wake it up, strengthen it, and ensure that it is one that is sustainable. And with regards to the negative impacts on social life, I think that areas and sectors like the agriculture, the energy sector, are areas that can be focused on in the support of the Nigerian government to move the nation forward and to see that issues of counterinsurgency are really broken down so that we do not continue in this cycle that we find ourselves.
One quick question to you,
Yes.
President. Do you see the possibility of creating a regional security architecture with colleagues in the room and not only looking at bilateral diplomatic partnerships, but actually building, an overarching security architecture to feed back
I
these
see
threats?
that working through the African Union, but as one of the speakers, I think in the last session, one of the UN ambassadors, I don't remember his name, but we need to remember, he was sitting somewhere here. We need to remember that it's a continent that is also, you have the north, you have the east, you have the west. People are different somewhat, and we should look at each region differently and not do a cut and paste like one said, but from the African Union angle, I think that there is also room for this kind of synergy.
Thank you very much, Professor Antonia. I want to move to Lieutenant Colonel Reserve Dr. Anat Berko. I didn't mention that you were a very high-ranking officer in the Israeli army and having served many years in those capacities, in addition to being a criminologist and a doctor. Help us under...
Somebody told me, because of the gender issue, you need to insist that you'll be presented also with your rank from the army.
Okay.
Because,
so I insisted.
Because nobody give up from the men's side.
That's right. That's right. So, Dr. Berko, help us understand the mindset of suicide terrorism, which is, certainly since 9/11, entered into the mainstream discourse and psychological discourse as well of terror. Help us understand the profile.
Okay, before that, I would like to say that it's a great pleasure to be here today, Dan, and thanks for having me. And I agree with Professor Antonia that there is no difference. We're speaking about the Iranian groups, militias, Hezbollah, and we're speaking about the Sunni and the Shia groups, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, who are also Iranian militias. We have them in Gaza Strip, but they are also, supported by Iran. And you have Al-Shabaab, and you have ISIS, and it's more of the same in the mindset. Although, it's a Sushi issue, Sunni and Shia issue, but it's more of the same. And as Ahmed Yassin told me, and I'm speaking as a criminologist, this is my expertise, face-to-face with terrorists, more than 20 years inside jail. And first interview that maybe I need to mention that I'm from Iraqi origin, my parents, refugees from Iraq, all my extended family, Linda like you, and Ahali. And I want to say that because in the West, people do not understand the mentality and the mindset. I remember that one time when I gave a lecture at Columbia University and I spoke about a female suicide bomber that want to clean her honor, and her parents actually want to solve a problem, a clean honor problem. And they said, okay, you will be a shahida. You'll become a female suicide bomber. And it was a great solution for the whole family. But one woman, American woman, asked me, Nina, it's very interesting. She asked me, but why she didn't buy a ticket and fly to London? And this is the whole thing. They do not understand that we are speaking here about obsession, like a duda, a worm that dig inside the mind. The same psychological process that we see with drug addicts that want to find the next fix. The same process. And we're speaking about alternative reality. If you spoke then about the September 11 terrorist attack, take Muhammad Atta. He has a problem with sexuality. When he spoke about that he cannot see even women, pregnant women. A lot of them repress sexuality, and the only woman that they can hug and touch before getting married is their mother. And the mother is a key here, because the mother emotionally can be very influential. A few years ago, I interviewed a Kurdish terrorist from the PKK that was on her way to the target to explode herself. And she said, if my mother told me to stop or just call me, I would change my mind. And I saw it in many, many times that the mother is a key here. But we see people with a very low self-esteem, marginalized. They think that if they cannot fulfill things here in this world, they will get it in the other world. And many times you saw also, I remember a 15-year-old boy, a stutter boy. He was the first minor that carry out suicide bombing attack in Israel. And his sister was also a female suicide bomber, then she was divorcee. So she has a cause, if you can say, to erase the shame of the family. But he said, you know, I was a very shy boy, and we see very introverted boy, and I didn't know anything about the girls, the banat, and I thought that in the next world I'll have sex and beer, and I didn't have experience in these matters. So 72 virgins to the male virgins, what we're speaking about. And it's very, very tangible. We cannot say that we see here mental illness. It's not mental illness. Sometimes we can see borderline personality with the suicide bombers, and for sure we don't see that with the dispatchers of suicide bombers or terrorists. And the dispatchers, the senders, are the key to understand this phenomena. And we can have many levels of dispatchers, and I think that they are much more important. But we see sometimes borderline personality, but not mentally ill. So they can know what is good and what is worse, and they can choose the path that they can go. So we are not speaking in the level of the individual as mentally ill, but we can take this obsession, and I suggested the terminology that I wrote about, Shahada mania. And this is something that we see also with jihad tourism, that you see with ISIS. To Syria, I call it jihad tourism and Shahada mania. The obsession to carry out istishhad, self-sacrifice. And this is something with a tunnel vision that cannot see and change the mind if somebody push the button. Very robotic behavior, and this Duda worm, the digging inside the mind. Also the perceived life in shades of black and white. Even Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, the founder of the Hamas organization that I interviewed with Reuven, Dr. Reuven Berko, my husband, he's from Ashkenazi origin, Holocaust survivor family, but he's much better than me in Arabic. You know, I know the Iraqi Arabic, the Jewish Iraqi Arabic, which is like Yiddish and German. It's different. It's not the same. But so we came together and we interviewed Sheikh Yassin, and I asked him, is there any age that you'll send somebody to be a shaheed? Would you send your own child as a minor to blow up in a bus? And he said, and this is, remember that, because I'm not just from the academia, I'm practitioner for psychological warfare. Remember that my son, and this is the key answer, they wouldn't send their own children to carry out terror attacks. They wouldn't. They send them, as a mother of Shaheed told me, they will send them to get the best education in America and Europe, and we will pay for it. So Sheikh Yassin said, okay, you know what? At the age of 15, it will be okay. And I said, okay. But he said, but if he looks like a man, Rajal, a man, we can send him before that. And if he hairy enough, or we'll send them before. So it's ridiculous. They send children, they abuse children, and even one woman told me they used and abused me. It's a way to solve problems. And now when we are getting to the social media, which become a tool for terror, and it's so dangerous because they want to have a short film in TikTok or to put their poster on the wall, and I'm going to show that I'm a man. And all this perception of manhood is so twisted. It's so different. They look at a man in the West like, you know, very feminine. They are not the real men. And they also cannot suppress violence. They use violence as a tool. They compete. And you see the organization and groups of terror that become like a fun to rape and kill with impunity. To rape and kill with impunity. What is Daesh? What is ISIS? Same what they did. So this kind of Islamism, and many, turn from Christianity to Islam to join Daesh. And you see also in Gaza a lot that convert to Shia. We see that. And I must say, also from the perspective of a former Knesset member that dealt with counterterrorism legislation, that there is something that we need to do. If you have jihad tourism, and you see girls or boys that leaving their country, living like in New York just to join ISIS in Syria or elsewhere, or Al-Shabaab or elsewhere, don't let them come back to your own state. Protect your own citizen. Don't import this radical perception and mindset and this duda and illness because you say human rights, and they don't have any other citizenship, so we cannot take it from them. I think that human life much more important than human rights, and we have the obligation to protect our own people from terrorism. And terrorism, and I just, the last sentence then, my book, The Smarter Bomb, about women and children as suicide bombers, I finished this book with a woman that boarded on a plane with explosive tampons. Who can stop her? You can have so many tools to do that. And you see right now that the technology is so advanced, science and technology, and terrorists and Islamists take this technology to harm our life and use the social media and the platform to do good, to improve our life in the world, and they do it just to harm all of us. So we need to protect ourselves, human life before human rights. Thank you.
You've been quite visionary in your security sense and vision for the last 10, 12 years. You've been writing a lot. Now, Namibia, if you do research on Namibia, you don't find a lot of terrorism, right? In Namibia, people sort of flee to Namibia from other countries in order to live safely in a city in a country of refuge since 1990, certainly, right? However, you are a security. You have a security vision, and I'd like you to share that with us for Africa, and picking up what Dr. Antonia said. Give us kind of a regional view or a continental view, if you will, of the real threats that the continent is facing and what we might do to approach them and to address them.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Do you mind if I go back and talk a little bit about the evolution of Israeli relationship with African states? I'm not as young as I may look, but I can go back as far back as 1967, when I was a young officer in Fort Benning, Georgia, taking advanced infantry school, advanced infantry training. And there were Israeli officers there with me, and the 6-day war started. They were recalled to Israel. They went, we were friends, They went, after 2 weeks they came back. So it was a lot of fun. Yeah. It was an exciting moment for me, because during that time, during the 6-day war, the entire Ethiopian church, over 1,000 churches, were open for service, for 24-hour service, and bells were ringing, and prayers for Israel. That was historic, and that explains how the relationship between the Ethiopian Coptic Church, not only the Coptic Church, but entirely the northern Ethiopia, how the relationship existed throughout history. That is 24 hours until they heard the news that Israel has been victorious. Then all the churches were closed back. That is the kind of relationship Ethiopians have with Israel. It is not transactional. It is not diplomatic. It is natural. It is biblical. It's religious. It's spiritual. So it's everything. Whatever happens in the world, that relationship cannot be changed. If you walk on the streets of Addis or any street in Ethiopia and somebody hurts you or somebody does something wrong to you, and you want to stop him, and you just shout in the name of the God of Israel, stop, and he will stop. And if he doesn't stop, the crowd will really strange. They'll think that he's a strange person because he should stop.
Would that work here in Jerusalem?
So yeah, I don't know. I think, but that was my age. That was I get way back, and sometimes later, I was an official in Ethiopia. I was a deputy foreign minister, and I was relief and rehabilitation commissioner during the 1983 crisis of drought during Operation Moses. So I had connections with many Jewish organizations. During all those time, beginning towards the end of the era of the emperor, there was a decision, a resolution by the African Union that every member should suspend relationship with Israel. While it was easier for many African states, it was difficult for Ethiopia. It was extremely difficult. And how do we sell this to the people? That we are not going to have any more formal relationship with Israel. It was a difficult relationship, but it had to be implemented because it was an African Union decision. And fortunately, the Israeli government understood, and they said, it's okay, we understand your problem, but we can always do it in a different way. So that relationship continued in a very discreet way, without, hopefully, anybody else knowing it, the world knowing it. It continued. I came to Geneva one time, sometime in the end of 70s, to have a meeting in a safe house with the director of African Affairs, the Israeli Foreign Ministry. And we had to do it in a safe house because we were afraid that if others know about it, then it will reflect on its image in the African Union. So what I'm trying to say is the evolution that we have gone. It's Israel with the pariah state in those days. It was completely disconnected with Africa. But over the years, today now, great majority of Africans recognize Israel. They work very closely with Israel. So it's more the consciousness, the efforts of the successive Israeli governments, and knowledge that really brought us to this level. So it's now you call it Abraham Accord, but I think there was this Abraham Accord in a very different way. You have been doing it and made it a success. Now we are in the next level, how we can strengthen that relationship. It's a very great improvement, a great success for Israelis. So I just remember these things, so I just wanted to share my experience. I had an organization, an institute, the Africa Institute for Strategic and Security Studies. I founded this after my fellowship with the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, as you know. I was the only African fellow there, and I saw the gap because when there was no knowledge, real knowledge about Africa, in most of the institutes in the United States, it's experiences, short-term experience, scholars who call themselves scholars, but they are scholars who have short-term experiences in Africa who come up and tell us what about Africa, and who write about Africa. So my idea was to have African scholars, or even if Europeans or Americans or Israeli scholars who have stayed in Africa, who have experienced life in Africa, and who have written about Africa. These kind of people, together with African scholars who can write about Africa. So we focused on security, strategic and security studies, mainly because in the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, I was working on terrorism and violent extremism. So the main focus was violent extremism and transnational crimes, human trafficking, migration, arms trafficking, all these was the focus of our organization. And we do that, and we have invited many African scholars and those experts who know Africa well, and that's what we do now. It was interrupted for 2 years because of the COVID, so we the headquarters is in Namibia. Namibia is the most peaceful place in Africa, the most beautiful place in Africa. It's a place to visit for sure. The most democratic state in Africa. I'm not a Namibian, I'm an American, but I've been working in Namibia as a United Nations official, and I decided to have this office in Africa, in Namibia. So do refer to our website, and please, if you feel like writing, we can publish your articles on our website. On the issue of
Africa security extremism.
Extremism, yeah.
Optimistic, pessimistic, what can be done?
Very pessimistic, very pessimistic. I bumped into the Shia, in Africa, the Hezbollah in Africa, the article I wrote on Hezbollah in Africa. I bumped into this organization in Nigeria while studying other extremism in Africa. And I bumped into this organization. It has exactly a duplicate of Hezbollah, right in the center of Nigeria. And it had a vast number of militia. They have uniformed, they have armed tanks, and no government official can enter that compound. They were protected. And I wondered why a government, an independent government, a large government, a democratic government like Nigeria would allow such kind of an organization, militia, to exist in the heart of Nigeria. So I started digging. I went even to Nigeria, and I wrote a big article. And it was a surprise for many Nigerians themselves. They were commenting, a lot of dirty comments on me, because he was a CIA agent, a Mossad agent who just wants to spoil the image of Nigeria. But eventually they found out it was true. And very recently I heard that there was the army, the Nigerian army, raided the compound and disbanded the I don't know how successful they have been in disbanding the organization, but it was revealed eventually. So I didn't relate it with Israel, but I was curious why we should have such organization in the heart of Nigeria, while Nigeria has got a more serious problem of Boko Haram. Imagine having both a Sunni-inspired terrorist organization and the Shia-inspired, Iran-inspired organization in Nigeria. It will completely complicate the situation in Nigeria. So I asked the government, why should you allow this? And they really heard us, and they have removed this. I think they're done with it. But in Africa now, we do this study in Africa. Violent extremism thrives more than it did a few years ago. It's people don't talk about it, but it used to operate Boko Haram and 11 Sunni-inspired organizations and two organizations Shia-inspired, which operate both in Nigeria, leftovers, and in DRC, and over 10 organizations operating along the Sahel. It's a lot of destruction because people don't hear it. You hear about it. But a lot of people are dying. A lot of governments are being destabilized, and a lot of destructions are happening in Africa. There's 3/4 of Africa in some kind of conflicts, mostly that comes through this kind of extremist organizations. So in security-wise, Africa is moving backwards. In every aspect, Africa is moving backwards. Some might tell you the narrative, the government narrative, or a narrative that has got an agenda. But the truth is there is a lot of problems in Africa. Read my article, the Wahhabi Invasion of Africa. It's a big article of 25 pages. You find it somewhere, but it is happening. It's a lot of problems in Africa. So that's what I can say. So we can get into the details if necessary, but that's what I want to say. Yeah?
Thank you very much, Dawit. That's terrific. Thank you. Now we move maybe to Dr. Burak, to perhaps one of the more complex situations. I remember, by the way, in 2010, going with a small delegation to Turkey to speak with then Foreign Minister Davutoglu because of the crisis at that time on the, if you remember, the MV Marmara ship that was on the way to Gaza, to Hamas, and there was this confrontation. And I realized at that moment that the Kemalist Turkey that we learned in university and in high school, and that something had really changed. Now, it had changed well before 2010. It changed some years earlier. Help us understand the Turkey of today. On the one hand, Istanbul has become a home to Hamas, a comfortable home for Hamas. The government has not designated Hamas as a terror organization. It's welcomed Hamas openly without making any excuses. On the other hand, Turkey, as Professor Bernard Lewis has said for so many years and written so many books, that Turkey was the great hope for the region in terms of mixing democracy, Muslim majority country, democracy, and very good close friendship between Israeli security, certainly, and Turkish security echelons. And so we have a very complicated situation in Turkey. Help us understand where you are today in terms of security, exporting, importing security, and threats and so on.
It's a very complicated issue, and it's lunchtime, so...
but it's before lunch.
Okay. I don't know how to conclude. Yes, it was hope, because Turkey is the first modern state, actually, in the Middle East, and it had a secular character. And the secularism, was extremely compatible with the Turkish, society and culture. Then Mustafa Kemal transformed the Turkish culture and the Turkish society into modern citizenship with integration to the Western security architecture and close relations with Israel after 1948. Which means that the identity of the state was quite clear. It was pro-Western, it was pro-secular, but I'm afraid I cannot say that it was a full-fledged democracy because the army's tutelage was like a monitoring mechanism over politics, and the army was functioning as a mechanism to limit the political parties, to marginalize the political system. And the national security definition was the main instrument in the hands of the army. By that I mean, army was using national security to demarcate the framework of legitimacy in the political system. Some political parties were legitimate, some political parties were not legitimate. For example, Islamist parties were not legitimate parties according to national security conception of the military. Or Kurdish secessionist parties were not regarded as legitimate parties. They were closed down, and this was a very fundamental principle of army. They were the guardian of nation state and secularism. But when AK Party came to power, Erdogan came to power, this has dramatically changed because Erdogan declared himself as the champion of democracy. After the Cold War ended, democracy, was a very popular term, and many circles in Turkey, including conservatives, liberals, including businessmen, supported Erdogan just because they viewed Erdogan as the champion of democracy. They expected Erdogan to integrate Turkey into the Western, global economic world and, the Western, organizations such as European Union, anyway. But this story ended in a very tragic way because Erdogan undermined the autonomy and power of the military, which was the guardian of secularism, and democratic institutions could not be replacement of the army. We were expecting a Supreme Court or independent judiciary or independent media to be replacement of the army, to be tutelary on the political system, but all of these bureaucratic institutions and all of these democratic institutions has been dominated by Erdogan. Still, he is dominating all these institutions. And this also changed the identity of the state. The state's identity was secular before Erdogan because, the army was on power, in control. army was secular and state's identity was secular. Now, state is represented by Erdogan, and Erdogan is not a secular guy. He's a conservative guy. But I should note that when Davutoğlu was prime minister, when Davutoğlu was formulating the foreign policy, the Islamist character of Turkish foreign policy was very apparent because Davutoğlu is a university professor and he is a philosopher talking about Islamist foreign policy or some civilizational foreign policy things. But Erdogan is not like Davutoğlu. Erdogan is not a very sophisticated, is not a very academic guy. He is a mercantile, pragmatic guy. So when a friction happened between Erdogan and Davutoğlu, Erdogan fired him. He established another political party which is not very popular. Erdogan is still popular. And Erdogan is looking for having, pragmatic and rational relations with Egypt, with Israel, with Saudi Arabia. Because Erdogan's identity he is a conservative guy, he's a Muslim guy, he's a very, very well-known Islamist figure, but he has also another identity. He is a very pragmatic guy. So if it serves Erdogan's survival in the domestic politics, he can have very close relations with Israel. No question. If Erdogan inflames Islamism or nationalism, this means that Islamism and nationalism helps him to survive in domestic politics. The formulation is quite clear in the mind of Erdogan. So there is a difference between Islamisms in Turkey. Davutoğlu was representing idealist, academic, or philosophical Islamism in Turkey. So he's very romantic. He's a decent guy, by the way, but I'm afraid of romantic ideas. So it's not, undefinable. You cannot expect where romantic guys stop. But you can always know that pragmatic guys can stop somewhere. Anyway, Davutoğlu is gone, and we have Erdogan. Erdogan's Islamism is very result-oriented, is very pragmatic, is very cost-benefit-based Islamism. That's all. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yechiel, do we have time, 5 minutes for questions, or 5 minutes do we have? Yes, questions, please.
More or less, it's my So my question to the army.
I think it's closed.
Amazing, okay. My question, I don't know how.
So the question is both of you. I mean, we have talked about the Iranian threat. And the Iranian uprising, more or less, is a minority-led uprising. I have interviewed Kurdish leaders, Baluchis, Ahvazi, and they're all dying, crying for Israel to help them. Why Israel is not taking this golden opportunity to further destabilize Iran? Thank you.
Thank you for your question. Israel, it's not the problem, just the problem of Israel, I can tell you when my father fled from Iraq as refugee, he spent 2 years in Iran. He was in the underground that smuggled Jews from Iraq through Iran that gave him and other Jews a shelter on the way to Israel. So it was totally different. But now we see Iran acting not just in the Middle East, in Europe. In Europe, the drones, the weapon, and the collaboration with Russia. And all of this without the nuclear umbrella, and still America is begging for an agreement with Iran. So it's something ridiculous in my point of view. And there is another thing when we are speaking about mindset. The West do not know how to negotiate with Arabs, with Iranians, with Turks. They need to just to buy a rug somewhere and to understand how to negotiate when you start with a very high price and you lower it to the ground. And, you know, it's very funny because when we built our house, I made the negotiation with the workers, with the Arab workers, and my husband, who speaks fluent Arabic, said, you know, they look at me and they said, why you give this Iraqi to deal with me? Why? And it saves a lot of money. So this is something that they don't understand. Look, the involvement of Russia in Ukraine is amazing, and nobody's stopping. So Israel needs to stop it. We have Russia and the Iranian on our border. And believe me, we do a lot to stop them, much more than anybody else. And I think that part of the Abraham Accord is that they saw that Israel is the only power, only state that dealt with the Iranian effectively. But now, America needs to take the leadership, and not by agreement. The agreement wouldn't solve anything.
Yeah, I'm just going to, ladies first. We're going to have,
Just a second.
Okay, quickly. Yeah,
Very quickly. First of all, I hear your call, and I think that you're totally right, and we should do more. And because, as Amin said as well, the solution is regime change. That is the solution. The easiest one, the cheapest one, the right one, the good one for the people of Iran. Not only the Baluchis and the Azeris and the rest of the Kurds and all of them, also for the Iranians, people of Iran. That is the solution. By the way, Mahsa Amini was a Kurd. She became so famous as a symbol of this direction. Having said that, I hear this call not only from you, I hear this call from many of my Iranian friends who are saying the same thing. And I hope that what we see is not what is actually happening, and much more is happening. Because we need to be there, and it's unbelievable. Look, I was in LA a couple of weeks ago, on Wilshire Boulevard. The entire boulevard was covered with signs: women, freedom, life, right? This was amazing. The people understand that something is happening, and we need to take advantage of that, and the time is now, before it's too late, because just because they understand it. As Amin said, just because they understand it, they rush up towards having the capability to produce the nuclear weapon. They understand that the terrain is shaking. And that's the time when we, not only Israel amongst other Western countries, led by the United States, has to do something about it. That's the time.
please. Yeah, that will come.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Toby Love. I'm a Nigerian Israeli advocate for Israel-African relations. And my question to the panel, a subject that I was expecting to be addressed more was the importance and maybe mobilization through education of the youth and the younger generation. Because when we speak of extremist ideologies, radical groups, even interconnectedness, in my opinion, the youths are insufficiently engaged and are either going to be opposed to these movements or be recruited into them, or even worse, be bystanders. If you could relate to this, I would appreciate. And also if I can take advantage of this platform and address the wider audience here. This has been an amazing day so forth, and I'm looking forward to the second part of it. But if we're speaking about shifting alliances, then we can also speak about shifting ideologies. And I'm very happy to say that all of the regions, all of the countries seated here in this room today are part of the highest fertility rates in the world. And so as humble as we are, we have a lot of work to do if we want to address a better relationship and better interconnectedness between everyone. But also, it is crucial that the younger generations and the youth are involved in these dialogues. And I invite anyone who's struggling in that aspect to reach out to me, because that's what we do. Thank you, and I'd really love to hear your answers.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is a very important point that you've made about youth. You know, we always talk about that the time bomb is Iran becoming a nuclear country and a nuclear bomb country. We talk about the Russian threats about using the nuclear bomb. We never talk about the time bomb being youth and children. In France itself, there are thousands of children who seek political, their families seek political refugee to France. Yet when it comes to school time, their parents refuse to send them to these schools and call these schools that adopt infidels and atheists. So these children end up at home getting education from Hamas and Hezbollah funded television channels. These are the time bombs. These are children who will go to the streets and shoot innocent people. So I think no one is addressing even the laws and regulations in these countries about how to deal with the future in 10 years, who these children will become.
Thank you. Yeah. One of the things that we discussed this with John from Liberia is to create innovation, young leadership innovation initiatives around various technologies and really begin to raise the next generation together with the United States and together with Israel to raise the next generation of young women and men who really will be innovators across all of the categories we're talking about, and to formalize those relationships to create a counter-narrative that way through innovation and leadership. So that's one of the things that comes out of our three-day meeting. Abdullah, please.
Hello, thank you very much. I want to, from Abdullah Hamdino from Mauritania, from Mohit Center for Development and Peace Issues. First of all, I want to thank the Jerusalem Peace Center, President Dan Diker and Aviram and all the team to give me the opportunity to be here with you today with all the bright spirit here, and it's a great opportunity for me. I have two questions. The first one is for President Dan. Regarding the Abraham Accords, do you think this accord can have, in a long term, a positive impact on the normalization not only between Arab states and Israel, but also between Arab people and Israel, and bring peace to the entire region between all Abraham sons to live together in peace on this holy and wonderful land? This is my first question. And the second one to Mr. Amin. Do you think that there's a chance to see a collapse in the middle term to the mullah regime in Iran, and the pressure coming from interior uprisings and external sanctions to lower tensions in the region coming from that regime and his allies? Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, is there any possibility that regime collapses? Yeah, of course. I mean, regimes like Islamic Republic, they appear very strong if you look at them from without. But the collapse happens very quickly. Just, I mean, imagine 1985 and look at Soviet Union. I mean, many experts would say that, yeah, that's a regime has a lot of problems, but it's not going to collapse soon. So that's a possibility for regime. I mean, regime has lost all of its legitimacy. I mean, no legitimacy whatsoever. And regimes know that. It needs to actually suppress people on daily basis. So once you do that, it means that you have lost all of your authority. I mean, regimes cannot survive without authority. I mean, you can have all power, but it doesn't count for authority. So Islamic Republic has lost its legitimacy, it has lost its authority, and it's not able to deliver to people. I mean, millions of Iranians just fall below the poverty line now. just because of the regimes, and it's not able to solve problems. So there are some dictatorships in region, but they at least developing their country. And I mean, look, China. Yeah, of course, it's dictatorship, but it's advancing the country. But Islamic Republic is dictatorship, but it turns people's life into like disaster. So I don't see any future for. It's a matter of time. It's not that whether Islamic Republic will collapse or not. It's when he's going to collapse, and the question is that is the West, the United States, is ready for that or not. But I will advocate that if one of this regime collapses, maximum support for Iranian people. That's the solutions. Well, Trump actually did maximum pressure. So that's one pillar of that. Another pillar is maximum support for Iranian people. I think that would be solutions. To region. It's good for Iranian people, good for region, good for Israel, and good for United States.
Yeah, thank you. Abdullah, I'll answer your question right afterwards. I want to just I promised come quickly, have your question, then we'll have a question, then we'll go eat. We have a great lunch, so thank you for the patience.
Well, the lunch is getting cold, Dan.
Yeah, I know. Quick one. Very quick.
My question is to Dan and the General. I believe we have addressed the system after the the disease have spread all over. What we need to understand is how we have failed to understand U.S. foreign policy in terms of containing the containment of Iran since 1979. The present time, the U.S. have persisted in, addressing failure with another failure since that time. Now, we need to develop a real understanding. And if we're going to contain Iran, we need also to, aid the Iranian people to evolve and take down this regime. But, regime change from outside, it's not going to be the right approach. What we need to do is convince the United States to start with, is to abandon its yesterday's foreign policy toward this region and enter a real partnership and not dictating terms. And we have seen what the result of 2003 invasion of Iraq. It was disastrous. It was, accepted by a lot of parties in the region, but at the end, we all paid for it. And to Dan, the first suicide attack was in 1983 in the barracks of the Marines and not the 1911. Yeah.
I didn't say it was
It is. Okay, so please, can we address U.S. foreign policy?
יוסי, נצטרך ממש לקצר, כי אחרת לא יהיה ארוחת צהריים.
Do you want me to ask my question and then we'll answer both?
I'll say in one word.
Okay. So
I agree with you completely.
Yeah, and that's why. And by the way, that's why we're here, Abdullah. That's why we're here, because the bill trusted. We chose the words carefully. Trusted partnerships in a period of shifting alliances, and that's where Israel understands its role as an indigenous member, but a member together with you, with these nations, to build within the cultural intelligence sensitivity of these regions to build those partnerships. That's why. That's what this is different. This conference is different. The relationships will be different. So thank you.
So being the last one between you and your lunch, I'll be very brief. My name is Gilad. I'm an ambassador in the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. My question goes to Professor Antonia. Under President Buhari, bilateral relations were somehow bumpy. Now you have a new president, Tinubu. We say Mazel Tov. Can we expect that the bilateral relationship will be improved under the new president? Thank you.
Thank you. I think the environment is open now, maybe more open. The the president-elect, I'm sure, is ready to work because we need those relationships more. We need the partnerships. You know, we have a number of issues caused by the insurgency that has happened over the years. I believe that the government will certainly be very open. That is my expectation.